I think we have pretty similar thoughts overall, do we?
I would say so. Look, I think there's going to be a couple differing opinions. For people who are just tuning in, it's going to be a very Ozempic themed chat. The entire podcast is going to be around Ozempic. Your questions answered, common questions that aren't answered. What is it? How does it work? That kind of situation. We're by no means experts, but we are seeing what is occurring in the field. People using Ozempic. Often we are in collaboration and in talks with other doctors and GPs for adjusting certain dosages and making sure that we have the client's interest at heart. We're doing this for the client, of course. So it would be ridiculous if we're not at least relatively versed, even if we can't prescribe it ourselves. Often I do end up writing some recommendations for some people, but there's a lot of nuance in that situation. That's a little bit of a summary in terms of Ozempic overall from what we'll be chatting about today, Max. Anything on your topic before we start?
Yeah, well, it is interesting. It's an interesting topic, and I think it's interesting because it's so new. It's not something we haven't had those GLP-1 agonists around for. Like, how long have they been around for?
They've been around for a fair few years. They've only become popular in the last year or two.
Right. Okay. And so, what were they originally intended for this, or was this another?
What do you mean originally intended for?
Like, well, for example, aren't there a whole bunch of drugs that the original intention wasn't their actually final outcome of what they're being used for today?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. But that goes for a lot of different situations, a lot of different substances. Ozempic just being one of them. Originally designed for type 2 diabetics, improving blood glucose management.
Yeah, exactly.
So for people who aren't aware, people with type 2 diabetes are unable to regulate their blood glucose appropriately. It's often too high, which can cause damage to a lot of vascular and fine structures in the body. Eyes, kidneys, small vascular structures that supply blood to your nerves, fingertips, toes, things along those lines. Massively increases rates of stroke, heart attacks. Not a very nice thing to have, especially when it's mismanaged. So it can get a lot worse once you have the classification. There's a whole plethora of things that can get way worse, but managing is really important, ensuring that it's within a standard blood glucose range, or at least as close to it can be as possible. Ozempic being the name one that we're commonly referred to, GLP-1 agonists being the class of drugs. And I'm sure someone's going to correct me with many of the things that we'll be saying in this conversation. This is just from a dietitian perspective who likes to research things every now and then out of his own free time. Not that I have much of it nowadays.
Yeah. So firstly, what would your recommendations be? Obviously you just explained that we can't prescribe them ourselves, but when you're discussing with the doctor, what do those discussions usually look like around, should a client go on Ozempic, should they not? What does that actually look like?
Yeah. It's a bit of a tricky scenario. It's usually of an open conversation with the client. Usually I'm always client first. They're going to have a conversation. What is their point? What state of change are they in? Have they tried other let's say, strategies before? How can we go about this situation and navigate it as efficiently as possible? And of course, not put them at the risk of having side effects and things along those lines. And I suspect in the next 20 years, we'll have a drug where there is absolutely no side effects, and then everyone just has no problem. And then seeing a dietitian for weight loss is now a second thing. It's not even a factor in the scenario. They're seeing dietitians for other reasons. In particular, for our conversation, it's very much examining the entire situation. Then once, let's say, for any specific example of where I would recommend it, let's say an individual has stress management problems. They use alcohol as a substance to manage their stress, which we can have a conversation about why that's not amazing in the first place. But let's say for the sake that they're not willing to give up alcohol. Alcohol, of course, as we know, is very energy dense, 27 kilojoules per gram of alcohol in terms of the total energy density. For reference, carbohydrates and proteins are about 17 kilojoules per gram.
It's 29, but that's okay.
Sorry?
It's 29.
Oh, 29 for alcohol. Thank you, Max. Yeah. And then fats being 37. So alcohol is fairly energy dense. This individual may have a lot of alcohol, and let's say that the alcohol is now leading to a weight gain, and they're unable to go out their normal daily activities. They're unable to, let's say, heal from their bulging disc and unable to participate in physiotherapy. It's a position of, okay, we can try to do like a quote unquote standard dietitian process where we go through, we try to be holistic in our practice, work collaboratively with the person. But if they're unable to enter a energy restriction just from additional dietary tactics, then it may be a course for, okay, Ozempic may be that kind of nudge that gets us in the right direction, but it's important that we also aim to really have it and really implement some really good positive habits in the meantime while we're on this Ozempic. And then often I start at a very low dosage. So the main problem I see with people taking Ozempic is that they're doing it for, number one, just the weight loss, which I think is incredibly difficult. People don't differentiate weight from muscle mass, from bone mass, from total water weight. Very tricky. And then the weight loss they want very, very quickly. So as we know, the faster you lose weight, the more muscle you will lose. If you lose weight, you're going to lose muscle no matter what, with the exception to a very few circumstances, particularly in untrained individuals who are resistance training. But the increased rate of weight loss from a dosage of Ozempic that's too high is quite worrying, because we know that these people don't really gain the muscle back. It's one of the situations that they've gotten into kind of this position. If I'm making a very general assessment, this is not talking about any one particular person. People who generally rely on Ozempic for weight loss generally don't exercise, which means that the stimulus for muscle growth isn't there. Once they lose the muscle, if they gain a little bit back, it's not going to be much. And usually they don't gain much back. It just leads to a reduction in overall function. It's usually around the people around the kind of 50 age bracket that I would say are generally starting to kind of delve into more of the Ozempic situation. That was a lot of information,
really
Max.
not a good time.
Sorry?
You love your long rants. That
Absolutely.
was really a good time. That's really a bad time to lose a bunch of muscle, your 50s. Like, you probably couldn't choose a worse time, to be honest, because, if you're in your 30s or 40s, like, well, look, you still got a bunch of years to regain muscle before you get into your elderly ages. And if it's very old, 80s or 90s, it's like, well, you're 80 or 90. So, like, you can't have these crazy high expectations. 50s is probably the worst decade. Would you agree with my assumption with that?
Well, I think it gets exponentially worse the older you get.
But
like, I guess more important.
It's more just like the expectations. Like, if you got a patient come to you in the 90s, they've lost a whole bunch of muscle. It's like, it's bad, but it's like, well, they're in their 90s. Like, that happens. That happens to people in their 90s. They lose muscle.
I don't know. Like, I think I disagree.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think, again, the older you get, the more important the muscle is. And I don't think there's any age point where you can't gain muscle. You can absolutely gain it well into your 90s. It's just the risk of injury tends to be a little bit higher, and ensuring that you don't have a fall or a tear or something along those lines is incredibly important. So preventing massive drops in muscle mass, because as we know from the data, it's not exactly like it's a smooth trend. We just generally lose a little bit of muscle here and there. No, it's very much a totally fine, has an incident, massive muscle loss, or totally fine, potentially gets a little bit ill, doesn't want to eat, or the sickness kind of gets the better of us at that situation. Muscle reduces, and that's our new baseline. It's very much a step like a stepping process towards a low muscle state. There is, yes, absolutely, a little bit of muscle loss that occurs gradually, but by far it's more like a stepping situation. And the importance of muscle increases in its importance as we go on.
You mentioned how that Ozempic is... Actually, I'll rephrase it. Yeah. You mentioned how Ozempic is pretty much a last resort medication. Are there specific instances where you should consume Ozempic, or you should have Ozempic? No. I don't even know how to say it. Are there specific instances where you would prescribe Ozempic to someone that's not a last resort? They're just doing it just to trial something out.
Not regularly. I wouldn't recommend it from most situations. I think it's kind of, it's a tool. I was having this chat with an individual the other day. He goes, "Oh, what's your thought on Ozempic?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, I've had many conversations with other dietitians and other health professionals. One, people think that it's the devil and it should never be in the conversation at all. Some individuals think that it's absolutely the go-to and there's no other alternative. I'm in the middle ground. It's a tool. There's nuance to a tool. If you never had held a hammer before, why would you go with a chainsaw first up? So it's very much a situation of, okay, have we trialed some other methods? Can we go with something that's less risky? It doesn't have the same side effect profile. Can we go with something that isn't so financially burdensome, because it is very costly, and that's one of the bigger downsides of the situation, especially with the kind of, I think that's a really good conversation to have, Max, is do you think that Ozempic and GLP-1 agonists creates a quick fix mentality in the population?
I think I really like what you said before about the way the most important thing is the way you go about it. And when you start taking these medications, you could do it the easy way. You could take your appetite's going to reduce significantly, and you're probably going to lose weight just as a byproduct of taking the medication, right? or you could do it in a way that would probably be more optimal and better for you overall, which is going to be to use this as a complete shift and to completely change your change your eating habits, what you're eating, the portion sizes, everything, and create a really big shift in your life to lead you to long-term success rather than, as you were sort of saying, the short-term quick fix success, which might be more likely to happen if you were to just take the Ozempic and change nothing else in your life. Would you agree overall with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's such an important factor in the medical system at the moment. If doctors are prescribing Ozempic and just giving a high dosage and saying, yeah, she'll be right, mate, no worries at all. One, I think they're doing a disservice, and that's medical malpractice. And two, I think they actively should be referred to a dietitian or actively engage in the nutrition coaching themselves as GPs, as medical practitioners, to a degree that they would deem appropriate, as long as the GP can kind of provide the AGHE guidelines and the client is receptive to a certain amount. If they do require, they often very much do require some additional support, refer to an allied health professional that is versed in that area. Often doesn't have to be just nutrition, can be nutrition, exercise physiology, physiotherapy if they're having injuries or things that are recurrent, things along those lines. But it's important that we support these individuals in this time of need, because it's now a really great position, because we potentially just kind of kickstarted a really great transition into a really healthy mindset, a really healthy oriented trajectory, versus potentially something that was a little bit stagnant, a little bit kind of trial and error, a little bit yo-yo, which we often see. Oh, I tried keto, I tried carnivore, I tried paleo, I tried vegan, I tried everything under the sun, I've tried R.E.A.L only diet, and then everything usually doesn't go amazing when you're trying all these situations. They work for a little bit and then kind of, they're the kind of situations where I'd be very cautious of, and the kind of conversations I'm having with people, just mentioning that it's not the fix that's going to fix all of your problems. There's going to be some side effects. There's going to be some element of, we need to look at this with a fine-tooth comb. We need to analyze everything in your life going on. And potentially this may not be the right solution for you, but it may also be an adequate tool for you to use. So again, that was a bit rambly. An open conversation needs to be had. And medical practitioners play a really, really important role in ensuring that it's not just a set and forget situation. It's a, hey, this is a really great opportunity to maximize the amount of effort and efficiency that we have in this scenario to get to the person from A all the way to B.
Yeah, interesting. My gut feeling as to one of the biggest powers of a drug like Ozempic, or any sort of weight loss drug that's going to prove to be effective, there's going to be, as you mentioned earlier, there's going to be several that come out over the next few decades, which again, it's going to be hard to study, but I think the power of momentum is probably the biggest thing out of almost everything, really. Like, obviously you've got the genetic factors and the fact that it does like objectively reduce your appetite and do things to work from a physiological standpoint to actually decrease the amount of food you're desired to eat and all that. But I really do think, and maybe I'm biased because it affects my life so much and my personality works so well with it, but just the ability of momentum and continuing going on the path. And I think that's what Ozempic does the best out of anything, really, to be fair. Like, it's obviously got amazing traits, but I think the best one is the fact that it enables you to lose weight for a good amount of time, and then you get a really good amount of momentum to keep pushing. You're still motivated every single day, and it's not like you're not having to, like, as you were saying with the yo-yos, like, you're not having to struggle to get the ball rolling. It sort of just helps you get that kickstart almost.
It definitely can be, but often I find that people are turning to Ozempic out of desperation, not out of planning and logic. It's a situation of, okay, I've tried everything else. I can't really get to the position I want to be. I'm stuck. I just need some help. And often it's, okay, well, there is medications available now. It may not be ideally used for someone with non-diabetes, but look, the application is still there to a certain degree. I don't think it's PPS medication at this point for weight loss use, but it's potentially an option. And I think exactly what you mentioned, Max, ensuring that the momentum starts appropriately and we continue that on, eventually weaning off, can be really, really beneficial for that long-term, really positive trajectory.
Yeah, 100%. What would you say to people? You mentioned earlier on there's practitioners who think Ozempic is worse than AIDS. What would you say to those practitioners?
What do I say to those practitioners? It's like, you just kind of look at them and think, how the fuck did they get their license? Like,
Right, really? Okay.
Like, what? It's everything has a pro and a con. I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, blueberries is the best food ever because it has super high antioxidants and it's great in polyphenols and it has a ton of nutrients and such. But then you can flip to the script and be like, okay, well, it's also low in protein, so you can't just eat just blueberries. And then it's low in some like B vitamins, like B12, so you can't just eat blueberries. So there's pros and cons to every situation, even if blueberries are amazing objectively and subjectively because they taste delicious. I think being on either side of the spectrum in any sense can be very problematic. Often I don't think it goes, often I don't think the conversation and notion of like the middle ground gets pushed in social media. It's very one or the other. And that's probably where a lot of these people are finding. It's you only have maybe two dumbasses out of 20,000 practitioners who are like, oh, but you can't have that, blah, blah, blah. It causes cancer or some link. Or I studied like 2 minutes of biochemistry and now I know that this pathway gets upregulated and that's the end of your entire life. And it's like, oh, buddy, hold up. You're not a biochemist. You're stay in your lane. It's very good to be aware of these kind of situations, but we should look at what does the actual data say? What does the randomized human clinical trials say? What does the outcomes say? Prior to this conversation, I think we had a previous conversation on Ozempic and we were talking about how the long-term effects of Ozempic are not amazing because we tend to be reliant on those. And when we stop, the weight tends to pile back on. But now we're kind of seeing almost the opposite of what I was prior assuming and the prior data suggested, in that once we come off of a GLP-1 agonist, we are seeing an extended period of weight maintenance, which is amazing to me.
Did you read that recent study that came out? Did you?
Yeah,
like
absolutely. It was so interesting. It's so interesting. Very, very interesting. Max, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought it. Look, my gut instinct was that I could see either being a possible option. You know, I could see that it would make sense that if the weight did naturally go back up over time, and it would also make sense if it didn't from a physiological standpoint too. So I think both options were, from a like prediction, like if I was a betting man, I wouldn't have betted hard on either one because they both make logical sense really overall. But yeah, no, it is good to see that. It is good to see, and I think it's a really good instance in that how people just jump to conclusions really quickly, and how it's not something that it's really good to see people's biases as to where they truly stand, because the data isn't out, and it wasn't out, and it still isn't out, to be fair. Like we've got a couple of studies, but not many at all. But people are still making these bold assumptions around, oh no, but the weight will go back on and you'll have negative effects long term in the future. It's like, wait, where are you coming up with this? You don't have data to support it. So it's just purely just your own bias and your own opinions about Ozempic overall. And yeah, 100% agree about the middle ground. What about those people who, because me and you seem to be pretty softly sitting in terms of the spectrum of things. We've got, strong, hard people that think it's worse than the devil. And you got people that think it's the best thing since sliced bread. We're kind of probably sitting, in the middle of neutral versus best thing since sliced bread. Would you say that's a fair account of where we are at the moment?
Yeah, look, it's a tool. It can be very useful. I don't think it's the best solution by any means. And I think it can be used in combination from a lot of different aspects. And I think it only applies to individuals who are of the obese plus category, to like the obese class, I would say B onwards, tend to be, how would I describe it in terms of BMI? Probably like a BMI of 40 plus, I would say, is a definitely applicable situation if we aren't able to appropriately do some lifestyle changes and nutrition counseling along that train.
So is your guess that lower BMIs of 30 or even late 20s, the pros and cons, I'm guessing you're coming about it from a pros and cons point of view, right? The seesaw, in the sense that once you get to those very, very high BMIs, 40s, 50s, so on, that there's so many cons of being at that weight from a health perspective, despite you incurring cons from the Ozempic, that actually outweighs, because you're very likely to lose a bunch of weight and offload some of those cons of being overweight. Is that a fair assumption as to your thought process?
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely, without a doubt.
And so is your gut feeling, or potentially research that you've read, is that even late 20s or early 30s, it's just not enough cons to warrant putting the Ozempic on?
Look, every situation is unique. I'm not going to say that I would never recommend it or recommend a client to have a conversation and get prescribed that medication in a BMI under 30 or even in like your late 20s. Definitely not under 25. I think would be ridiculous. For reference, I kind of quote healthy weight range being 18.5 to BMI of 25. Think of someone who was I don't even know how to describe this, like a lower body adipose tissue composition. They're perfectly fine. I would not stress about it. If you hear any model being like, oh, I want to get on Ozempic to make me skinnier, it's like, shut the fuck up. Go like look at your own life for 2 minutes or have a conversation with the dietitian. We can have an assessment of what your actual priorities are and if it would be healthy for you in the first place. But generally, the higher the BMI gets, the more the pros of Ozempic come into favor versus the cons. So the potential of side effects and the potential of the financial limitations, it seems like it's much more indicated. However, it's very important to note, have we trialed some dietary interventions? Have we trialed different dietary strategies? Have we seen more than one different dietitian? Because not all dietitians are for you. Not all health professionals are for you. That's why we often recommend to jump between some doctors, get some second opinions. The same applies for dietitians. Not all dietitians have the same strategies, as we're very much aware. We'll have dietitians on in the future that will contradict us completely. There's dietitians
like you can go see
field.
Matthew and then you can go see me.
Oh, well, look, we're pretty similar, but like, yeah, there's definitely differences between us. Yeah.
No, I'm just joking. Yeah. No, I get that.
Yeah.
100% agree. It's like we'll 100% have people on that we can, have contrasting opinions, and it's not about right or wrong. It's about what works better for you, and it's just different, and different people find different things work best for them, and all comes down to personal experiences and a wide variety of things that are not necessarily hardcore in the literature, Although I think, to be fair, Matt, and I think you'd agree on this, I've listened to many, many debates, mostly in the sports science, kind of like exercise science field, where they will debate intricate things around, deloading or like very, 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 like very, very niche like things on a given topic. Things like, I don't know if you've heard of like P ratio before.
No, anyway, I'm not familiar.
That's cool. It's like they'll like do like very, very intricate debates, and like we would do the same, right? Like if we had a dietitian on who we disagreed with, we'd be able to find some niche things that we like disagree on, and like we have like points of difference on. But if we were to zoom out and look at the forest for the trees, or whatever the saying is, 98% or 99% of the things in nutrition as a whole, we're probably all going to agree on.
Mostly. Well, the qualified ones anyways.
Yeah. You'd hope every dietitian's qualified.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great points. Max, I'd absolutely love to talk about Ozempic, how does it actually work in the first place. So I think that there's a bit of a miscommunication between medications and how they actually work. It's like, oh, it magically boosts my metabolism. Like, no, it doesn't. What Ozempic does is it reduces your appetite. It makes you feel fuller quicker, and it reduces the amount and the rate that your food moves through your gastrointestinal system. Hence, that's where some of the side effects come from. That's where some of the not so favorable situations can occur, not guaranteed to occur, but some of them can occur. If you reduce the amount you eat, as you probably know from listening to our previous podcasts, you have probably entered in a energy deficit, meaning that, let's say if your energy is, you need 10,000 kilojoules per day, just big numbers so I can make my tiny brain work better. And then you, let's say, reduce your total appetite or reduce the amount you're eating through various different dietary means, or potentially increase the energy that you have, but we'll leave that for another conversation. If you end up having, let's say, reducing your appetite to 8,000 kilojoules instead of what you need being 10,000, you are now in a 2,000 kilojoule deficit per day. That deficit per day over time is going to lead to a very big reduction in total energy intake, which will again use the body's stores of energy, primarily going to be adipose tissue. However, if it's fast enough, will be things like your muscle tissue and additional stores from glycogen or things along those lines. So overall, it works by reducing the amount that you want to eat. And that's the major factor in this scenario, being your mind. If you reduce the amount of total that you eat over time, there's going to be an energy deficit. Energy deficit leads to a reduction in weight over time. It's not some magic science where it's like, oh, it messes with the chemistry of your each individual mitochondria, bibbidi-bobbidi, DNA, mRNA. We get those buzzwords out of here. It's just physics. It's just science. It's very simple from my perspective, but it's important that we know that's the exact mechanism that works. And if you can do that without medication, that's an amazing thing to be very proud of. And it's probably where I would lead to. It's kind of where the dietitians lead to in the first situation of how to incorporate dietary strategies to get you to that point without the need of additional medications or fear mongering or additional psychological stress. I think that's the important factor, is that we want to make this easy for you. We want to make it a clear strategy that it goes into your life without having to kind of bulldoze everything down. And the reduction in psychological stress and thought processes needed for this situation and minor adjustments on a daily basis lead to huge results over time.
Yeah, 100%. And if you are looking for some medication to increase your metabolism, probably just take about 1,000 tablets of T3, go to your doctor, say my thyroid's slow, take 1,000 tablets of T3 and you'll be right. Your metabolism will fix itself right up, because metabolisms do break, Matt.
Yes, they definitely do. I don't know if people realize that you're joking, but I think it's important to note that you are. I mean, look, you could take a bunch of things that potentially increase your metabolism. A lot of them may kill you. I wouldn't really recommend anything through pharmacology. I would recommend increasing your metabolism through increasing your lean muscle mass, just through exercise and strength training.
Take some tren.
Yeah, easily, bro. Easy. Yeah. No problems at all. I think, yeah.
Max. No, that was a good explanation. I really like that, because that's the reality as well. Is if you are someone who is interested about taking Ozempic and considering it, you want to know how it's working, what it's actually doing for your body, so you understand what it is. Because I think with that understanding of how it works, that can also influence the changes you're going to make as well.
Absolutely.
If it worked in different ways, whether it was potentially slowing down just the digestion of your fat, or like the fat you consume, or whatever it is, then that would impact the way you're gonna eat and the diet you're gonna consume, because you might want to focus on eating more fatty foods, because that would even further slow it down, or whatever it is. So getting good understanding of how it actually works from a physiological point of view is also really important. I think that was a really good explanation. Guys, quick ad break. We are currently taking on clients. Click the first link in the description to explore more. Back to it.
Thank you. I've heard of people taking lipase blockers in the past, being the enzyme that breaks down fats in the GI system. And it may sound like an okay idea in the first place. Like, oh, I'm digesting less fat. Fat's super energy dense, and it's just going to pass through me because it'll go into the bathroom. And like, yeah, that's kind of the main problem, because any enzyme that isn't being used can lead to a lot of gastrointestinal discomfort, a lot of GI bloating, things along those lines. You're going to be having steatorrhea, which is I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's just a lot of fat in your stool, and that's not a very nice experience. Yeah, apparently I haven't smelled it myself, thankfully, but I've heard it's an awful smell in terms of just that entire situation. So I wouldn't recommend taking any enzyme blockers. I think that's it's why would you even do that? It doesn't make sense to me.
I think the rule of thumb with all of this is that if you have somewhat of a background in physiology, whether it be you studied it during uni or maybe high school, I don't know if too many people study it during high school, but I think the rule of thumb should be, unless you've been studying physiology for greater than 10 years, you don't have any good ideas. That's the reality of things, is that if you have an idea, it's probably already been thought of, and it's been decided whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. Like basic things like, when we learnt a little bit about the fructose, Matt, we knew a little bit about physiology, and we learnt that fructose just got processed through the liver, and so it didn't spike your blood glucose. And Matthew and I, with our limited physiology knowledge, were like, wow, we've just literally cured diabetes. And we got hyped, and we're like, no, people have thought about this for decades now. It's been well studied and well researched. And same as the lipase stuff. If you have a basic knowledge of physiology, which you do unless you've been studying it for years and years and years, you don't have any good ideas. That's a reality.
Or they've probably been thought of before, and there's a reason why we don't go down that pathway. It's either limitations of the human body, or limitations of the current medication, or things along those lines. There's the pros and cons. Again, the cons are just too high for that specific scenario. and again, with the lipase thing, if you're not breaking down your fats, you're potentially not absorbing the essential fatty acids that we need from our diet, which can lead to not great things for your health. Just don't do that. That's not a good thing. We do need
it's just so stupid.
fat. Yeah, we need fats for our bodily functions. If we don't get them, we kind of kick the bucket relatively quickly. I'd say within the next year or so. But
exactly. And if you do have a good idea, it's been thought of, and then it's a medication now. So it's like, well, you're a bit late.
Potentially, like you can always go down the pathway of developing the medication. There's always many that need to be developed, like the countless amount of medications for cancer medications or things along those lines, or again, additional medications for type 2 diabetes management. That sounds really cool. I'm particularly interested in the gene modification type medications. I think they're really, really interesting. That would be cool. I don't know much about them, and I think they're very much in the kind of controversial camp and very like early in their testing. But I recently listened to a podcast where they kind of delved into that, and the gene therapies are really, really amazing, especially for cystic fibrosis. I think it's such an amazing kind of trajectory that we have for those clients now.
Yeah, that would be cool. There's just so many things, basic things you could change, like celiac. Like that's just isn't it just like one gene?
It's like it's a few different situations, but it's one of those like things. Yeah, it's definitely a genetic link, and if you can flick a switch and make all the people with celiac not have celiac, that'd be amazing. I think I've just read a recent study that majority of people who think they're on a gluten-free diet, if they're celiac or not, are actually consuming about at least 5 or so grams of gluten per week, which is enough to kind of keep the GI system. I'm pulling that number out of my head, but it was enough to be to the point where it was negatively affecting their gastrointestinal system, reducing and kind of destroying that microvilli. It's
1 gram a week.
Yeah. Look, it's one of those situations where it's very much a zero tolerance policy, and it's just it's interesting how we kind of, even if we're very vigilant about it, for even people with celiac disease, often it can be under the radar, things in like sauces or contamination between kitchen products, or if we go to eat out a lot, chances are potentially you are contaminating in certain areas, unless it's a very strictly gluten-free kitchen. Yeah, we're getting a long way in terms of that area of management. However, I think we've still got a long way to go in terms of education for the general population that, hey, it's not just some randos thinking that, oh, I'm a gluten-free diet because it helps my tummy feel better. It's like, no, this is a medical condition. We need to treat it like a medical condition. It's like, I would treat it the same way as I would treat an allergy to peanuts. It's like, it's going to cause a long-term potential damage, going to increase your rate of certain cancers. I'm like, well, I wouldn't really give peanuts to someone and be like, yeah, you're the same as celiac disease. Peanuts is more of like an acute, hey, you're going to go to the ER in about 5 minutes and here's an EpiPen, just fucking jab it in your thigh. But yeah, the importance is absolutely there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like it's interesting knowing this stuff and then speaking to people who are celiac. I hang around this girl for a little while and she's celiac and she was really relaxed about it all. And I was like, okay, like, do we have like separate toasters or like what? And she's like, nah. Yo, I'm like, I don't know what to do in that situation because you don't want to lecture her on her own thing. You know what I mean? But like, it's like at the same time, it's like, do you know things or?
Yeah, very
so, like,
interesting.
What do you recommend? Like, if you came across someone, if you had a friend and she really didn't care about crumbs here and there or whatever it was, like she'd butter the same butter container and all that sort of stuff, would you be having a conversation? What would you be doing?
Yeah, it's a tricky scenario because of course I would say you have a bit of a duty as a healthcare professional to kind of educate the general population, especially if you see someone doing something negative for their health. However, I would strongly believe that it's the person's decision to take care of their own health, but ensuring that they are relatively aware of the situation, kind of just mention in passing, like, hey, would you like to have a conversation about celiac disease and why it's important to have a zero gluten intake? If not, if they say no, perfectly fine, leave the conversation because I very much appreciate that it's your life. You can live it how you want to. If you want to get bowel cancer, no problems at all.
100%.
But it's one of those situations. Yeah, it's like, why wouldn't you have just even 2 minutes of a conversation and kind of potentially avoid so many negative things later down the line? But of course, you can always use that position and go way too far, whether it's like, I don't know, you have this kind of superiority complex. It's like, everyone's overweight. I need to fix everyone, blah, 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 blah. And then you just kind of start yelling at people, be like, oh, you need to go on a calorie deficit. It's like, whoa, you're not in charge of their lives. They're doing what they're doing. You don't know their situation. You haven't had an initial consultation. You don't know what's going on in their lives. You don't know why they're in the situation they're in. There's a lot of nuance to these situations.
Yeah. And I think we can confidently say the reality is when you do see someone who's overweight or obese, you can confidently assume that they're not dumb and they know their situation. Like, you don't need to go up to someone and be like, hey, do you know, like, you're overweight, like, dude, and all sorts of like, yeah, I know, dude, I know.
Yeah,
Whereas someone who's a celiac, they actually may not know fully. So that's why I think even asking some basic questions, like I asked about the toaster and the butter, because I think they're two really good questions to see how vigilant the person is and then how much they know. And then you can kind of eke in there, like, do you know you're meant to have separate toasters? Do you know you're meant to have separate butter containers? Because then if she was like, no, I've got no idea. She said yes. She's like, yeah, I know. She's like, I just don't care.
Yeah, okay.
Like, okay.
Well, then that's their decision.
Yeah, exactly. And then so bang, like conversation over. Like she knows. Like she doesn't need a lecture. But if she was like, no, I've never heard that before in my life. Then it's like, well, would you like to know? You know, kind of thing. And then you can continue going. I think those basic questions to start it out, just like what you were saying, is a really good way to start it off.
Just a quick ad break. We're now currently taking clients by the link in the description or via our website. Back to it. Absolutely. The amount of times that I've seen or met people with celiac disease and they haven't had a consultation with a dietitian or an in-depth discussion with a gastroenterologist, and it baffles me because I'm like, how do you, not to poke smack at your general practitioner, they're very knowledgeable, absolutely, but celiac disease is a very niche situation. It's not super common. It's about, what would you say, it's 1% of the population at the moment?
I think it is 1% or maybe 0.5%. Something
similar to that. But if you're just having a general conversation with your GP and your GP goes, yeah, you need to kind of cut out all the gluten, and it's like, okay, I just won't eat bread. It's like, man, there's gluten in a lot of different products, like you wouldn't even believe. Wheat, dextrin, things along those lines get added to products a lot. I think it's one of those things that you need to be vigilant on. But I think we've delved a little bit too much into celiac. I'd love to talk about the specific mechanisms of Ozempic rebound and if you're actually going to maintain the weight loss over time. Is it okay if we jump into that, Max?
Yeah, for sure. 0.5% to 1%. So we're both right.
Beautiful. That's good to know. In terms of Ozempic, the theory was that I had conversations with clients before, being like, okay, look, Ozempic's potentially a tool. However, unless we do dietary strategies that are fitting with your lifestyle and things along those lines, the chances are is that you'll get off of Ozempic and then you'll rebound and kind of gain the weight back, which is what I previously had thought because it made sense in my head. It was very much a situation of, okay, if the only thing that's changed in this person's life is an appetite reduction, when they get off of the appetite reduction and the appetite comes back to quote unquote normal, then they're just going to regain the weight. And you do see it to a small degree. It still is prevalent in terms of literature, but what we're now seeing in terms of what evidence has come out is that when you have an appetite reduction from the GLP-1 agonist, from Ozempic, semaglutide, Wegovy, things along those lines, you end up having more of a long-term reduction in appetite afterwards, is what I would suspect. Or it's a new habitual routine. So we've changed. Yeah, perfect. We've changed the standard habit of eating until I'm full or bursting, or eating until I'm over my potential energy maintenance and an energy surplus. And now we've changed it to have our dietary intake similar to what we were having when we were on these GLP-1 agonists for that long term. So once we can come off of it, we've kind of continued on that trajectory. And it's amazing what a small habit change does to a person's lifestyle and their health trajectory. It seems like it's a really positive thing for these individuals, even if they haven't received the most amazing dietitian experience or the most amazing nutritional or general health experience alongside the medication prescription.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think it also could be something to do with my gut feeling, and I don't have anything to support this, but I don't know. I just have a gut feeling about it that it could be something to do with your hunger hormones as well, your ghrelin and your leptin, specifically the leptin, specifically the leptin.
The satiety hormone?
Yeah. Purely because it's very, very atypical in people who are overweight or obese. the prevalence of it is very, very strange in people. Not what you would typically expect to see, the leptin levels in people who have a significant amount of adipose tissue. Because on your typical person, someone like Matthew is probably pretty typical in the sense that the leptin is produced by his fat tissue, by his adipose cells, and that essentially is a really good regulator for him for his body to decide whether he is going to be eating more or less at any given period in time. So if he has less body fat, if he's gotten sick, let's say he gotten sick and he's lost a decent amount of body fat, his body won't be able to produce as much leptin, and inherently he will eat more, and put on a little bit of body fat, and get to a point where his body produces more leptin now, and then his satiety is higher again, and he gets those fullness cues just like normal. And then same as if he have a really big Christmas and New Year's and put on a little bit of weight, post that period of putting on a bit of weight, he would notice he's actually getting fuller quicker because there's even more leptin being produced, and he's barely eating anything at all. And then it will come back to that steady baseline, which is typically referred to as your set point. But I think we could we need to come up with a new name for set point, just because it's so wrong.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think it's more of like a habit set point. It's like, what are your habits at that specific time?
You hit the nail on the head. That's so true. But that's not what we see when we look at the people's leptin levels in those that are overweight or obese. It's way out of whack, not what you typically like, it's very atypical. And I have a feeling that the leptin levels become a lot more typical once you lose that weight and you start your fullness cues start to be a lot more of what you typically see in those who have come off the GLP-1 agonists.
Very interesting.
I could be completely wrong though. I don't know why I'm vibing it.
Yeah, no, like I think it's a very interesting theory. I don't have anything to argue against it. I don't have anything to argue for it either.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
it's a potential avenue that can be explored. But again, hormones are such a strange thing. I considered being an endocrinologist at one point and decided to go into nutrition. Maybe I should delve into that field a little bit more. Very interesting area. But yeah, so in terms of how the theorized mechanism now for that kind of continued weight loss is that I don't think it's necessarily anything that's super magic that's changed physiologically. I don't think it's necessarily hormones has changed a lot or potentially some other factors. I think majority of the influence is through habit change. It's now you've had an extended period of time, usually months to potentially years of Ozempic use. And now your new normal is to have around that same level of dietary intake. So once the kind of cloche gets lifted, you can now eat more when you wanted to eat, but now your new normal is set to, okay, I'm having around the similar intake of my Ozempic use, which is, I can't even remember the total amount of weight people usually lose. Is it 10 to 15 kilos or something like that?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure about the numbers. Yeah. But it is a significant amount. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's just something interesting. I also theorize that when you have an extended period of time of a lower dietary intake, your stomach will generally shrink a little bit in terms of the total amount of food that it can store. And then over time, when you kind of get off of it, you're now at the point where, okay, my stomach is physiologically smaller than what it used to be. Potentially, that's going to lead to an earlier satiety response. It's many different factors that go into that scenario.
Yeah. I think a big one as well would be, this is just showing how there's never going to be one silver bullet. There's going to be a whole bunch of factors. The fact we've been on a reel off like 5 in a couple of minutes. Another big one as well is just going to be purely from a determination point of view. Usually after a really long diet, like as you were saying, they've been losing weight gradually for several months, if not several years. Usually after that period, you're mentally exhausted, you're physically exhausted, and you just cannot be bothered dieting anymore. You just want to eat normally, like what's normal for you, and you just want to just relax, right? You want to kick your feet up because you've worked so hard for such a long time. Because you haven't had that experience with the GLP-1 agonists, you've pretty much been just living your life more or less normally. There's not that exhaustion there, and you're still refreshed, and you can keep up these good habits. So now it's like, wow, I've got this new lease for life in that I'm not feeling awful because I haven't been like dieting for 3 years. I've just been living my life. So now I'm in this position where I've lost a whole bunch of weight and I'm extremely motivated to keep it off, and I can because I actually have the mental and physical capacity to keep it off. So I think that plays a really big part as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a really good summary and theory about how these things work and potentially the trajectory that we're seeing for these clients. To kind of summarize our positions, Max, I guess I would say that it's definitely a tool that can be used. I wouldn't recommend it for the first line of therapies. However, if you're going down the rabbit hole of, like I'm really struggling to kind of do these things, quote unquote, the natural way, maybe I should turn to pharmacology or surgery. I would turn to pharmacology, being Ozempic, Wegovy, way, way, way before having any surgeries. I think the age of the gastric sleeve and the bypass is now gone.
Yeah.
I don't think there's almost any indication for it. In fact, the amount of side effects, long-term health impacts, and reduction in just total quality of life from those surgeries is astounding, and I'd be very surprised if those surgeons have a job in the next 10 years.
I was literally about to say, yeah, those surgeons must be spewing. Because I'm of agreement in the sense that, boy, I'd be hard pressed to find a specific case study where you'd be looking at that the gastric bypass is a good option moving forward.
Yeah,
you'd be able to find it, but the gap is getting smaller and smaller by the day. It really is.
Yeah. Previously, for a little bit more context, we've been taught that the only, let's say, concrete way for people to maintain adequate weight loss moving forward is gastric sleeve surgery or something similar to a gastric bypass or something along those lines, bariatric surgery specifically. Even with dietitian interventions and big multi-government interventions for population health management, the supply and demand and the amazing way that people make food nowadays has kind of led us to have this kind of structure as a society of general weight gain over time. Previously, it was just bariatric surgery that was the be-all and end-all absolute guarantee that it will make you reduce weight, not necessarily make you healthier, by the way. Now we have the introduction of these medications, which is potentially a really great benefit for a lot of different people.
Yeah, no, 100%, man, 100%. Let's finish it off. Quite a few casts ago, I'd say like around about 5 or 6 casts ago, we did like a 5-minute segment at the end where we just did rapid fire questions. And it was really cool. I was listening back to it the other day and it was very fun.
Cool.
5 minutes. I've got my first question for you.
I've got about 10 if you would like to go through them. They're all Ozempic based.
Shoot. Yeah, cool. All right. Well, do you want to go first on me?
I'll go for it. You go.
Should Ozempic be covered by Medicare?
Oh, yes. I've had a thought about the other day. Yeah, absolutely. We can go into a really in-depth questioning and understanding why. But I think if you're looking at the total cost and damage that obesity and being overweight does to the economy as a whole, and the damage it does to the healthcare system financially, it seems like a no-brainer that why wouldn't it be on the healthcare for weight loss specifically? Absolutely, for type 2 diabetes management, without a doubt, because that was raised insulin levels. But I think I've gone way too in-depth in terms of that answer. My question for you now, Max, is Ozempic safe for non-diabetic users, especially for weight loss?
Yes, absolutely. Non-diabetic doesn't, that people are pre-diabetic. That's a thing. So you very well could be pre-diabetic and you can use Ozempic for that. And yeah, that's absolutely safe to take. The reality is, my words could get twisted here. It's safe to take for anyone, really. But would you recommend taking it for anyone? That's where things change.
I would say it's definitely not safe for some individuals, but I think overall, if you were to say more safe versus less safe, it's probably more safe than not.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Oh, and that's the reality is that as soon as you're introducing any sort of hormone or any change, any medication to your body, it's going to be not safe for some people, of course. Just quickly on the Medicare one, because I think it was a really interesting point you brought up, is that with all things with Medicare, you should probably look at it from an economic standpoint first, and then look at it from a person standpoint second. And that doesn't mean that if it doesn't check out from an economic standpoint, then you shouldn't do it. Like, of course, if it's going to help people out and be amazing in their lives, you probably still should do it. But in the sense that, like, even if it's not going to make much of a difference to people's lives, but a little bit, like the Ozempic one would make a decent amount, but not going to be like if they. Anyway, point being is that, as you were saying, there's probably a really good argument from an economic standpoint as to like why it would be better, rather like completely disregarding people's feelings and emotions and all that into it, which I think is a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that we often forget as a society, that healthcare is about economics as well, ensuring that we can like I've never heard that argument for, oh, like the governments have cures for cancer, but they don't give it to people because blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, they definitely don't, because someone alive earns more money for the government than someone who's dead. I'm like, that, and cancer treatment costs so much money, it's ridiculous for the healthcare system and the taxpayer overall. It's like, well, that argument never held up to me, and the same reason that I would think that generally moving forward, potentially that the Ozempic will get PBS registered for weight loss, or potentially something that's more tailored towards weight loss specifically, not type 2 diabetes management.
No, type, yeah. I think, yeah, if we lived in a society where we didn't have public healthcare, you could make more of an argument for that, the cancer thing. But the fact that we have public healthcare, yeah.
Yeah, spot on. Max, are there lifestyle or dietary changes that can amplify or reduce Ozempic's effectiveness?
Without a doubt. Yeah, we were just talking about that before. Understanding what Ozempic actually does, slows down the digestion, is a really good element to a really good education tool to amplify its effectiveness, really, in the sense that you can consume foods which are going to further slow down your digestion and kind of like double down on the effects it's going to have. If you were to have a whole bunch of soft drink all day long, it's not going to be too amazing, because the soft drink is going to just kind of run through you like it would without Ozempic, and you're not going to see those amazing effects. Whereas if you had a very, very fibrous diet, eating low calorie dense foods, you're going to really see amazing impacts from the Ozempic overall.
Amazing points. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if we're prioritizing protein intake to maintain that muscle as much as possible.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. And if there was a drug that came out that forced you to stop peeing, then for sure have a billion bottles of soft drink. you would just get clogged up and you wouldn't be able to have any more. But until that comes, then yeah.
Max, should we use Ozempic for aesthetic and not medical reasons?
No, I think this is great. It really depends on how much the aesthetic is impacting someone's mental health. I'm a really big supporter of that. The mental health is really important for a lot of people. And if you are feeling extremely depressed and awful about yourself because of the way you look, that's really not a good thing. And you don't want to be reminded by every time you look in the mirror or every time you catch a glimpse of yourself that you hate the way you look. That's pretty awful. So the objective side of me and like the harsh side of me is no. It's a silly decision. But then the more empathetic side of me is like, yeah, like people should be able to feel comfortable in their own skin and good in their own skin. And there's an amazing tool out there that can help to facilitate that. And we don't know the flow-on effects that can come from that. Once you start feeling a bit better about yourself, then you're going to be able to maybe potentially sleep a bit more. You're going to have lower stress, which could further improve your eating habits, which could, ensure you're catching up with friends more and keeping busier, which means you're going to be eating less because you're more distracted. And it could be a massive flow-on effect of vastly improve your life from these small changes that started, months ago or years ago. Absolutely.
I think there's definitely a merit for, hey, some things are okay to pursue for aesthetic purposes, but as long as they're not consuming you in an unhealthy fashion where you're obsessing over them. So again, starting out when you're a teenager, going to the gym for the first time, hoping to get some abs or whatever it is. Yeah, cool. That can be not an amazing reason to go to the gym, but you're in the gym for the first place. And that's in a really positive environment for your overall health, mental well-being, and your productivity overall. As well as we now have some pretty good literature to say that people who exercise are actually smarter than people who don't. So, I mean, it seems like a no-brainer to me. I definitely gained at least 2 IQ points from exercising.
It's interesting. Like doing the right thing for the wrong reasons is an interesting kind of thing to think about philosophically, in my opinion. You know, like if you were to read a book, but the reason why was because you loved looking at the sharp you love looking at like the sharpness of the letters and it reminds you of a knife or like stabbing someone or something like that. It's like, well, I mean, you're still reading, but like it's kind of weird, you know?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, absolutely. That's entirely why I read books, Max. Please don't kill me. Cool. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. What a great cast. Thank you so much for listening to the R.E.A.L Health and Nutrition podcast. The sponsor of today's show is you. You support the show by listening and using our services of dietitian consultations and performance coaching. We offer in-depth, one-on-one consultations to help you achieve your health and performance goals. Any random bloke online can give you a generic meal plan where we here at R.E.A.L work collaboratively with you to reach your goals, making you feel heard and including you in your journey's planning. Our service offers tailored advice and can accompany meal plans and/or realistic nutrition strategies, which can be booked via our website www.recoveryexerciseandlifestyle.com. That's www.recoveryexerciseandlifestyle.com. Just a quick disclaimer. This podcast is for education, information, and general entertainment purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medical nutrition therapy or healthcare of any discipline. The content discussed in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute of professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please review our terms of use via our website. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.